Arushi Talwar was a bright 13-year-old girl in India whose life ended under shocking and mysterious circumstances. One night in May of 2008, she was found dead inside her own home, while her parents slept in the room next door. What made the situation even stranger was that the family's live-in servant, Hemraj, suddenly vanished on the very same night. At first glance, her parents believed he was responsible and quickly alerted the police. But as investigators soon discovered, nothing about this case was simple. Was it a robbery, a crime of passion, or something far more complicated involving the hidden ties between Arushi and Hemraj? The events unfolded in the state of Uttar Pradesh, the most populous state in India. In the western part of the state lies the city of Noida, about 15 miles southeast of New Delhi. Arushi, born in May 1994, was a cheerful, intelligent girl attending a public school in Delhi. She came from a comfortable, middle-class family. Both of her parents were dentists at a local hospital and also ran a small private clinic near their home. To help manage the household, the family employed Hemraj, a 45-year-old man from Nepal. His personal life was marked by hardship. His wife was partially paralyzed and unable to work, and his 18-year-old son lived with a disability. With his family depending on him, Hemraj carried the full financial burden. He lived with the Talwars in their second-floor apartment in an upscale neighborhood of Noida. The apartment was on the second floor of a 3-story building. It had 3 bedrooms and a living room. To reach the living room from the main entrance, one had to pass through 3 barriers: an outer iron gate, which could be opened from either side, a mesh security door, usually bolted shut and only openable from outside, and finally, a wooden door that shielded the interior from view. Hemraj's bedroom was located near the entrance. His room connected directly to the living room through a side door. Arushi's room was next, off the hallway near the living area. At the very back of the apartment was the bedroom of her parents, Rajesh and Nupur Talwar. If someone kept walking past the bedrooms and up a staircase, they would reach the rooftop terrace on the 3rd floor, normally kept locked. Hemraj was one of the few people who held a key. For years, life in this home was stable and quiet. But that peace was shattered in the summer of 2008, in a case that shocked the nation and still haunts India today. On the morning of May 16, Bahadur, a domestic helper who came part-time to clean, arrived at the Talwar residence. Normally, Hemraj would answer the bell immediately, but that morning, Bahadur waited far longer than usual, pressing the bell repeatedly without a response. Anxious about being late for her other cleaning jobs, Bahadur tried pushing at the outer gate, but it wouldn't budge. When she rang the bell again, a sound came from inside. Looking through the mesh gate, she saw the wooden door slowly open. Standing there was Nupur Talwar, Arushi's mother. She explained that the mesh security door was locked from the outside and couldn't be opened from within. The key, she said, was with Hemraj, who wasn't in the apartment at the time. She guessed he had gone out to buy milk and would be back soon. Bharati, the household helper, explained that she was in a hurry and couldn't wait for Hemraj to return. She suggested that Nupur, Arushi's mother, search for Hemraj's keys in his room and toss them down from the 2nd floor window so she could unlock the gate from outside. Nupur did as suggested and then immediately called Hemraj. Strangely, the first call was cut off as soon as it connected. When she tried again, the phone had already been switched off. At that moment, Arushi's father, Dr. Rajesh Talwar, had just woken up and walked into the living room. On the table, he noticed an empty bottle of whiskey. This struck him as unusual since no one in the family drank alcohol. Concerned, both parents went to check on their daughter. Arushi's bedroom door was equipped with an automatic lock that typically couldn't be opened from the outside. Yet when they tried the handle, the door was unlocked. Inside, they discovered a horrifying sight. Arushi lying on her bed, motionless, with no signs of life. Shocked beyond belief, Rajesh and Nupur collapsed in tears in the living room. Meanwhile, Bharati returned with the keys, but she realized the outer iron gate had never been locked and the mesh door was only lightly bolted. Entering the living room, she saw Rajesh and Nupur weeping. Nupur motioned for Bharati to look into Arushi's room and insisted the culprit had to be Hemraj. As news spread, neighbors quickly called the police. Officers arrived soon after, but the apartment was already crowded with over 20 people: neighbors, relatives, and friends. The living room alone had about 15 people, while others moved in and out of bedrooms. The crime scene had been severely compromised. In Arushi's room, the young girl was found wearing a blue sweater, lying under a blanket. Marks were visible on her face and neck, consistent with sharp force injuries. There were reddish stains on the bed and floor. Nearby was a digital camera that initially appeared to contain 5 family photos. However, when analyzed by technicians, it showed 23 total images, 18 of which had been deleted and could not be recovered. Investigators collected 26 fingerprints from the scene, but with so many people contaminating the area, 24 were unusable, and the remaining 2 were inconclusive. Arushi's cell phone was missing, yet the key to her bedroom was oddly discovered in the living room. The forensic report concluded that Arushi died from sharp force trauma. The act was carried out in under 2 minutes, and the scene had been quickly cleaned. The estimated time of death was between midnight and 1 a.m. There were no signs of sexual assault. The perpetrator also took her phone with them. Police questioned the family. Rajesh stated that nobody knew where Hemraj was and that his phone was turned off. He believed the whiskey bottle belonged to Hemraj and suspected him of committing the crime. A neighbor further reported seeing suspicious marks on the staircase leading to the rooftop. Officers moved to check the terrace but found the door locked. They asked Rajesh for the key. He said it was in his bedroom and went to fetch it but never returned with it. At that moment, forensic teams were busy transporting Arushi's body for examination, and the officer at the terrace door decided the priority was to pursue the missing servant rather than inspect the rooftop. Later that afternoon, Arushi's body was brought back home, and due to the summer heat, the family requested not to repeat examinations and instead proceeded with funeral rites by 4 p.m. The following morning, a retired police officer neighbor visited the Talwar home. Inspecting Hemraj's room, he found 3 empty drinking glasses, impressions on the bed suggesting multiple people had sat there, and evidence in the bathroom pointing to several individuals having been inside. Tracing the staircase to the terrace, he noticed bloodstains. Concerned, he hired a locksmith to force the terrace door open. What lay beyond shocked everyone. A man was found lifeless on the ground, partially covered with a blanket, his head showing signs of blunt force trauma. Rajesh was asked to identify the body but claimed he did not know the man. When police arrived, they confirmed it was Hemraj himself, the servant who had been missing since the night of Arushi's death. Blood traces at the scene matched Hemraj, but investigators also found a shoe print that did not belong to him, strongly suggesting the presence of another assailant. Hemraj's cell phone was never recovered. The autopsy revealed that Hemraj had a sharp force injury to the back of his head, likely inflicted with the same type of weapon used on Arushi. Both deaths were estimated to have occurred around the same time. Because there were drag marks, investigators concluded that the terrace was not the primary crime scene. In Hemraj's room, 3 drinking glasses were found, all carrying his DNA. Yet it was unusual. Hemraj was not known to drink, and the Talwar family did not keep the habit either. There were no signs of forced entry into the apartment. So, the pressing question was, how did the killer get inside? According to security guards patrolling the neighborhood that night, no suspicious strangers were seen. The family apartment had 2 sets of keys, one kept by Hemraj and one by Rajesh. Hemraj's keys could open all rooms except Arushi's. Normally, his keyring was left on the living room table, but after the murders, it had vanished. Rajesh's set, however, was still in his bedroom. Another detail emerged from testimony. Rajesh's driver, Umesh, had dropped him off that night. About 10 minutes later, after parking the car, Umesh went upstairs to return the car keys to Hemraj. At that moment, he saw Arushi and Nupur sitting at the dining table, while Rajesh stepped out of his bedroom. These 3, Rajesh, Nupur, and Umesh, were the last people confirmed to have seen both Arushi and Hemraj alive. Just a few days later, Arushi's birthday was approaching. The digital camera found in her room was actually an early birthday gift from her parents. On the evening of May 15th, around 10 p.m., they gave her the camera, and the 3 took several family pictures together. Forensic analysis later showed the last photo had been taken at 10:10 p.m. At 11 p.m., Rajesh needed to access the internet to look up documents, so the Wi-Fi router located in Arushi's room had to be turned on. Nupur unlocked her daughter's room, where she found Arushi reading a book, and then switched on the router before heading back to her own bedroom. Internet history revealed Rajesh checked stock information, visited the clinic's website, and sent an email at 11:41 p.m. But curiously, at 12:08 a.m., the computer was used to access a web page without the home Wi-Fi. Meanwhile, a friend of Arushi said he called her cell phone around midnight, but no one answered. He then called the family's landline, placed in Rajesh and Nupur's bedroom, but again received no response. He even sent a text message, but it went unanswered. Investigators later confirmed the Wi-Fi router had been turned off at 3:43 a.m. and switched back on around 6 a.m. Forensic experts estimated the murders occurred between midnight and 1 a.m. With no signs of forced entry, it was clear the killer had a key. 3 days after the crime, police turned to a potential suspect, Krishna, a Nepalese man who had worked as a domestic helper for the Talwars for 10 years. Krishna had a habit of taking extended annual leave, during which he would arrange for someone else to cover his duties. 8 months prior, he had introduced Hemraj as his temporary replacement. When Krishna returned, he discovered the family preferred Hemraj and had kept him on instead. Investigators suspected Krishna might have acted out of resentment. The theory was that Krishna could have retained a copy of the keys, used them to enter the home, killed Hemraj, and then silenced Arushi after she witnessed it. But when interrogated, Krishna produced an alibi he had been in Nepal at the time of the murders. With no concrete evidence linking him, police were forced to release him. Back at the scene, investigators focused again on troubling details. Arushi's bedroom, located near her parents' room, had an automatic lock that required a key to open from the outside. Nupur testified that there was only one key, usually kept in the couple's bedroom. Yet after the murders, that key was found on the living room table. Additionally, the whiskey bottle on the table had come from a cabinet that was well hidden in the house. Only someone intimately familiar with the family's belongings would know where to find it. Both Rajesh and Nupur insisted they heard no unusual sounds that night. But logically, if there had been a confrontation in Arushi's room, some noise should have been audible. Rajesh and Nupur's statements to investigators were not consistent. Rajesh claimed that on the night of the crime, he had forgotten to lock his bedroom door, which could have allowed the killer to slip in while the couple slept and take the keys. But Nupur told a different story. She admitted unlocking Arushi's room to turn on the Wi-Fi, and while a phone rang in the background, she might have forgotten to remove the key from the lock. Another troubling detail: the call to police that night did not come from Arushi's parents, but from a neighbor. Rajesh explained this by saying that their part-time maid, Bharati, had walked in at the same moment, and she went to seek help from neighbors. Still, Rajesh could not explain why he himself never used his cell phone to call the police. Phone records added more suspicion. At 9:50 p.m., Rajesh had called a shop to ask about using a camera. At 10:04 p.m., he received a call from a patient. 2 minutes later, he called a colleague to discuss dental work for the next day. The log showed he continued taking work-related calls. Yet from 7:40 p.m. on May 15 until 1 p.m. on May 18, Nupur's phone was completely switched off, something unusual since her phone had never been off in the 2 months prior, and neither parent ever dialed the police that night. Another detail raised eyebrows. When police asked Rajesh for the key to the terrace, he said he would fetch it but never returned. Because of that, Hemraj's body was only discovered the next day. When investigators asked Rajesh to identify the corpse, he claimed he didn't know who it was, even though it was the very man who worked and lived with his family. A week after the crime, more revelations surfaced. Investigators discovered Rajesh had been involved in an extramarital relationship, and Hemraj may have found out. Police theorized that Hemraj could have attempted to blackmail him. To silence him, Rajesh might have lured Hemraj to the terrace and killed him. Arushi may have accidentally witnessed what happened. If she tried to flee, she could have fallen and sustained fatal injuries. Nupur, wanting to protect her husband, may have helped cover up the scene. Still, these were theories without hard evidence. 2 weeks later, the case was transferred to the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, India's top federal agency. Experts recreated the crime scene. They reported that Rajesh's driver, Umesh, had dropped him off the night of the murders. At that time, Rajesh was wearing a red t-shirt and shorts. The next morning, Bharati, the part-time maid, said she saw him in the same clothes. Lab tests later confirmed the clothes bore Arushi's blood. The CBI began building a new theory. Perhaps the Talwar parents had discovered a relationship between Arushi and Hemraj, something they could not tolerate given the rigid class divisions in Indian society. Investigators argued that cultural shame and honor could have been a driving factor. Driver Umesh also recalled that a few days before the murders, Rajesh had harshly scolded his clinic assistant, Krishna, for a mistake. Humiliated, Krishna allegedly threatened revenge. 22 days after the crime, Krishna was arrested. At his home, police found a blood-stained pair of pants and a Nepali knife. During questioning, Krishna mentioned a friend, Rajkumar, also called Lakshman, who also worked as a servant in the neighborhood. Police then searched Rajkumar's home and found another pair of pants with bloodstains. While in custody, Rajkumar shocked investigators by confessing to the murders, only to retract his confession soon after. Another servant named Vijay was also linked to the case. Investigators theorized that Hemraj, Krishna, Rajkumar, and Vijay all knew each other. On the night of the murders, Hemraj might have invited the others over. Out of resentment toward Rajesh, Krishna, with Rajkumar and Vijay, could have entered Arushi's room to assault her. When she resisted, tragedy struck. Hemraj may have walked in during the act, and the men silenced him and dragged his body to the terrace. But Krishna and Vijay both had solid alibis. Only Rajkumar could not fully prove where he was. His employer testified that they had been at a train station that evening, returned by 11:30 p.m., ate a late meal until 12:30, and then Rajkumar went back to his room. However, his room had a side door that could let him slip out unnoticed. Riding a bicycle, he could have reached the Talwar home in just 20 minutes. Even so, forensic tests showed that the fingerprints of Krishna, Vijay, and Rajkumar did not match those recovered from the Talwar residence. 4 months later, with no solid evidence, all three men were released. A year after the murders, investigators tracked down Arushi's missing cell phone. It had surfaced in a black market. A man claimed he had found it only days after the murders, given it to his family, and eventually it was sold to others. Unfortunately, when retrieved, no data could be recovered from the phone. When the investigation had nearly reached a dead end, the CBI once again sent biological samples from Arushi's body to the lab for further testing. This time, the results were entirely different from the original police report. The earlier report had concluded that Arushi had not been assaulted, but the new findings contradicted that. Investigators also discovered that the original examiner personally knew Nupur, Arushi's mother, who, despite being the grieving parent, was also among the prime suspects. Based on Hemraj's head injury, the CBI theorized that the murder weapon might have been a 5-iron golf club belonging to Rajesh, Arushi's father. Though Rajesh did not play golf, a neighbor had given him a set of clubs years earlier. Forensic experts noted that the dimensions of the 5-iron matched the wounds on both victims' heads. While no DNA was found on the club, it showed clear signs of having been cleaned. 2 years after the murders, the CBI filed a report naming Rajesh as the primary suspect. Soon after, both Rajesh and Nupur were formally charged. It wasn't until 5 years after the crime that the trial began. Prosecutors argued that on the day of the murders, several people in the house observed Rajesh not as grief-stricken as expected, but rather tense and guarded. They emphasized that there were no signs of forced entry, and suggested that the first forensic examiner who was connected to Nupur may have tampered with the results. The prosecution's case was that Rajesh and Nupur killed their daughter and Hemraj because they could not accept a possible relationship between them, and afterwards staged the scene to cover up the crime. After 6 months of hearings, the court sentenced Rajesh and Nupur to life imprisonment. Both insisted on their innocence and immediately appealed. In January 2014, the appellate court ruled that the CBI's conclusions were based largely on conjecture without direct evidence. 3 years later, in 2017, Rajesh and Nupur were acquitted and set free due to lack of proof. The decision sparked widespread debate across India, with many feeling justice had not been served. To this day, no new leads have surfaced, and the true killer remains unpunished. The Arushi Hemraj case has become one of the most haunting mysteries in India's modern history. Its tangled relationships, conflicting testimonies, and unanswered theories continue to capture the nation's attention. Who was the real perpetrator? What was their true motive? Perhaps one day, the truth will emerge, and justice will finally be delivered. And what about you? What do you think of this case? Share your thoughts in the comments. And as always, if you found this story insightful, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next deep dive into another infamous case.